This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/Wondery.
Bombas makes the most comfortable socks, underwear, and T-shirts.
Warning, Bombas are so absurdly comfortable you may throw out all your other clothes.
Sorry, do we legally have to say that?
No, this is just how I talk, and I really love my Bombas.
They do feel that good. And they do good, too. One item purchased equals one item donated.
To feel good and do good, go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code Wondery for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code Wondery at checkout.
There's one thing that will forever change the way you sleep, and it's the softest 100% organic cotton bedding from Boll & Branch. You'll fall asleep faster wrapped in the most luxurious comfort. You'll never sleep hot again with airy blankets, cloud-like duvets, and breathable sheets. You'll experience pure comfort on night one and feel your bedding get softer with every wash. Discover the difference with 15% off your first order at bollandbranch.com with code WONDERY15. Exclusions apply. See site for details.
I would ask that they find a place in their heart, anywhere, to have some compassion for her family. Even find a way to let somebody know where she is, even if they're not going to come forward themselves and put themselves legally in jeopardy. To find a way. Just let the family have that. Let them gather in Long Prairie, Minnesota, share their Jodi stories, and not continue to wait for Jodi to find out what happened to Jodi. They may not get in, they may not know who did it, but find a place. And it might be somebody. I interviewed a convicted killer years ago whose wife first told me that she was his alibi. And then after he went away to prison, she called me and said, I lied. And because I was afraid of him. But then she came forward and shared with police more information. You hope that there's someone like that out there, if it's not the person who did it. And we know, as I mentioned earlier, the anniversaries, milestones are very significant to the family, reminder of the loss. But they're also, from what we understand, significant to the perpetrators. And that's why we will keep doing these events, keep it out there. I think there's a reasonable chance that whoever took Jodi, if the person's still alive, is coming to our website, coming to our Facebook page, checking in. So we think of that as we move forward, that we could be getting a peek from that person. And I want them to know we're not going to give up. One of my grandkids asked me, how long are you going to do this? This is my grandson. And how long will you continue to do this, Grandma? And his younger sister said, forever. Well, I hope it's not forever. I hope I get answered so I'm not, continuing. But we're committed one way or the other to continue to do what we can to use our experience to find Jodi.
That's Carolyn Lowe, a veteran crime reporter who's taken a strong interest in the disappearance of Mason City, Iowa television anchor Jodi Huisentruit. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. This is the second of 2 episodes on Jodi's case. If you've not heard the first episode, I recommend you check it out. As we mentioned in that episode, not long after graduating from St. Cloud University in Minnesota, Jodi Huisentruit got a break and started her broadcast journalism career with a CABS affiliate in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. She was instantly noted for her talent, and her career blossomed rapidly, eventually taking a position at an ABC affiliate in Alexandria, Minnesota, and then at KIMT, a CBS affiliate in Mason City, Iowa. It was a stepping stone to larger markets, and Jodi's rapid rise was exceptional by any standard at the time. On June 26, 1995, the 27-year-old's future in broadcast journalism seemed limitless. But the next morning, at about 4 a.m., Jodi's producer at the station called her apartment after noticing she had not arrived for work. When Jodi answered the phone, she told the producer that she had overslept and she was on her way. Jodi only lived 5 minutes from the station, but 2 hours later, she still wasn't there. And an hour later, the station called the police. When officers arrived, they instantly could tell something was wrong. The red Mazda Miata that Jodi had been driving was in the parking lot, as well as evidence of a struggle. A bent car key, a bag, a hairdryer, and at least one red high-heel shoe was found near her car. As police interviewed neighbors, they learned that someone had heard screams around the time she would have been leaving for work, and a neighbor also noticed a white Ford Ecoline van idling in the parking lot around the same time. But since then, the case has gone cold. But in 2004, two Minnesota television journalists, Josh Benson and Gary Peterson, created a 13-part series on Jodi's case and also created a website called findjodi.com. The website would eventually become a clearinghouse for tips that might lead to Jodi. The group has also kept a lot of public attention on the case and produced 35 podcast episodes on it. Carolyn Lowe is now a part of findjodi.com, an all-volunteer group that now includes journalists, former law enforcement, and others. Carolyn's a veteran crime reporter who spent 34 years at WCCO-TV in Minneapolis and St. Paul and worked as a newsroom manager for KSBY-TV in Santa Barbara, California. Carolyn has a long history of reporting on cold cases. In 2015, she worked on a special assignment on the disappearance of 11-year-old Jacob Wetterling, who went missing in 1989 and whose body was found in a pasture north of Minneapolis in 2016. Jacob's killer confessed that same year. Carolyn has a background somewhat unique among crime journalists. She graduated from the FBI Citizens Academy in Minneapolis, has a bachelor's degree in law enforcement, and a master's degree in police leadership. Carolyn once held a Minnesota police officer's license and spent 12 summers working 2 weeks each summer, trying to get a better idea of what it was like to be a patrol officer. She also became a licensed private investigator in order to help develop relationships she hoped would help her gain insight both into Jacob's case and to Jodi's. Today, in the second episode with Carolyn, we're going to discuss her career as a crime reporter, Jodi's life and her disappearance, how it changed journalism, investigating uncommon cases like abductions, the difficulties of trying to unravel cold cases, and how loved ones of victims often rally quietly in the background to support each other. We're also going to discuss what loved ones can do to keep cases in the public eye and why it matters. In this episode, we'll also dive into some of the issues we discussed before, but also what Carolyn hopes for Jodi's loved ones and the message she would send to the person who took her. So in Law and Order, as opposed to the realistic police procedurals like homicide life on the street, the police have a protocol. Person's missing. They are automatically begin their search and taking all these steps and collecting all these clues. But I think we probably know in reality that these kinds of disappearances, like that appear to be an abduction like this, are so rare that often law enforcement doesn't know what to do in these moments. And I'm just curious, like, what was the initial reaction by law enforcement if they obviously knew something is wrong here?
Well, they did reach out. I would say that I think they treated it like a homicide, even though they weren't sure it was a missing person case initially. They treated it that way. They had offers, the FBI help, the state DCI. They had lots of people help them. They canvassed the building. They did search on the river. Jodi's apartment was on the edge of the Winnebago River. They searched that, ground searches. They did a very massive search in those early days. The next morning, I believe afterwards, they were there looking at what cars are going by at what time, just doing all this traditional stuff you would expect. I mean, this was a high profile case. I think anybody, any young woman who had disappeared in those circumstances would have probably had some attention, but given it was somebody so well known in the community, the police chief showed up. I mean, everybody was there from the police department who was on that day. So it was a big turnout. But they had many ways to go on. Back then, there were no surveillance cameras. There wasn't the kind of digital stuff you can get nowadays with, financial transactions. No eyewitnesses. Some people later said they thought they heard a scream around 4:20, 4:30, but nobody called police at the time. So it's, for me, looking back, it's the toughest case with the least amount of evidence I've ever covered.
Right. A clear amount of, when you say least amount of evidence, it clearly evidence that something's gone wrong, right? And something bad has happened. There was evidence clearly that something had gone wrong, but not a lot of forensic evidence or clues for them to travel.
Well, I mentioned the partial palm print, but to this day, we don't know if they've identified whoever it was connected with. They've asked a number of people, subpoenaed a number of people for prints, but then I've also talked with friends of Jodi's who were around the car in the 2.5 weeks she had it, and they've never been tested for a comparison, elimination. So it could have been one of her friends. It could have been somebody walking through the key apartments and saw this new car. She'd only had it, as I said, 2.5 weeks or so. So it's hard to know how relevant that is in terms of connected to Jodi.
There's always a white van, but I had read that there is a white Ford Ecoline van seen by one of the neighbors in the parking lot. Is that something, they were able to ever identify or figure out whether that was actually true or who it was?
Somebody driving by who lived not in the immediate neighborhood of the complex, but driving by that day, came forward and told police they'd seen this van in the lot. They put it out. They put a description. And unfortunately, that witness passed away this past summer. So if anything ever came any further, he's not there to be interviewed again. But nothing was ever established. And some people have confused that white van, as I think I may have mentioned earlier before we talked. A white truck had followed Jodi the previous October, and they are not.
And that was a pickup truck, right?
Totally
not a van.
different. Yeah, small pickup truck. But people, they hear white, they hear this, and there's just been one of my frustrations reporting on this, there's been so much conflicting information over the years, some of it from the media, some of it, even law enforcement at times, it's called a black truck. Well, we got hold of a police report. Now it's a white truck, and we interviewed it. Josh Benson from our Fun Jodi team interviewed the lead investigator several years ago and said, no, it's a white truck, but it's a lot of incorrect information has been put out over the years, but it's a white truck.
Yeah.
And they never tracked that person down. So we don't know, was it just somebody who recognized her, who just spooked her, or what the deal was?
Right. But there are a lot of things that seem to be sort of like building towards, she was certainly, and it could have just been Sixth Sense or, because it's funny, you mentioned The Gift of Fear, which is that Gavin de Becker's book that I essentially sum up as, hey, your anxiety is your friend. It is trying to help you. Sometimes it overreacts. Sometimes it misses the mark on what you should be worried about, but you should listen to it because it's trying to tell you something. And I think sometimes part of what can happen is, we're picking up on, I remember the psychiatrist telling me that, as best they can guess, when you first meet a new person, when they walk in the door and you meet them, you're noticing millions of little things about them in that moment. And your mind is making conclusions about it that you don't even see. And I think anxiety can sometimes be like that, where, it's warning us that something's wrong, but we may attribute it to certain things that may or may not be what you're worried about. But one of the interesting things in listening to her case and thinking about, she filed a police report about the white pickup truck that was following her. She started taking self-defense courses in the months before, she had talked about those telephone calls bothering her, whether they were all connected or not. It sounds like, and tell me if you agree with this, something was telling her that she wasn't as safe as she
I,
made.
I absolutely agree with you. And I think one of the challenges too in our TV business is I've gotten on elevators where I haven't felt all that comfortable with somebody, but because of what I did for a living, I didn't want to be rude, and I wonder how many things
Right.
Jodi might have had like that because, someone might call your station or write a nasty letter. And gosh, now with social media, you're likely to hear, I saw her at the grocery store and she was such and such or whatever.
Or even write too nice a letter.
Yeah. True. But that's, that vibe, but something was telling her, and she did tell, she wrote a letter to her good friend, Kelly Torgerson, who lived in Mississippi. And Kelly got the letter, I believe the day after Jodi was abducted, that, we need to be careful. I mean, some friends she put on a little more of a brave front, and other friends she shared a little more, but I think she was trying not to, we said earlier, not to make a big deal, not to be the crybaby, but something was not right. And whether that not right is what happened to her, it's hard for me to shake that off. And because a lot of the narrative over the years seems for a long time to focus on someone who knew her. But how do we know it wasn't someone who thought they knew her, who knew about her, that she didn't know, but made her uncomfortable?
And that's actually a really good point, because I think in a lot of situations, even with the oddities of this case, you'd sort of think this is somebody who, may have known the person or may have interacted with them before. But for somebody like Jodi, who's in I don't think it's just journalists, but someone who's in the public eye, the list of people who feel like they know you very well is much deeper than even if you were to give someone a list. Like, Julia and I joke that the FBI has this questionnaire where people around you, basically answer all these questions about you and your life, and it helps them build victimology. And I always joke that I should give it to my friends at least once a year to get them to fill out. So when I disappear or whatever happens, they'll at least be able to solve it. But like, if you were to ask me, what people know me really well, what people are really attached to me, what people, whatever their interest level in me, or even hatred for me, or pick whichever. As somebody who's in the public eye, my list is always going to be shorter than the reality, because there are going to be other people who may like me that have never said it, or may want to like hang me on a cross who have never communicated with me. And I wonder whether that complicates the victimology in the case, that you can't really build a good profile of who was in her life, because there were probably a lot of people who were in her life that she didn't even know about in that sense.
Oh, just think of her working out at, she would go to the gym, go to the YMCA. How many people did she see there? Going to the grocery store just every day. She's appearing at,
who kind of knew her, but she didn't know them.
She was in their living room. And I've seen a window into that over the years from the amount of people I run into, either had a photo when they met her or just had an anecdote. I was talking with a police official not too long ago for another agency who remembers he used to see her at 2 a.m. when she were 3 a.m. going into work. They were at a local superette. She was in there, and I thought, gosh, could it be somebody who was at the superette regularly? I had never heard that anecdote before, but there are just so many people who have their memories. For someone who was there not even 2 years, she had an impact beyond what you typically see. She had that it factor.
Yeah, no, and I'm sure you've actually probably run into some of that yourself. I remember last year I was in the gym and I was working out, and I knew one person in the gym. One person who came in the gym, and this is like 5:36 in the morning. It's a pretty big gym, so lots of people. And this lady comes up to me and is like, "Are you Jason Blair?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am Jason Blair." And she's like, "I have been following your life story since 2003. I'm so glad you've been able to turn your life around. Like, when, X, Y, or Z happened with you, it was so inspiring that you were able to turn it around. I feel like, I've been following your path." And I'm thinking to myself, like, this person kind of knows me, and I've never met them in my entire life. I mean, and it doesn't bother me. Like, in that moment, I'm like, okay, that's cool. But
Yeah.
it could, that tough stuff I've been through has been inspiring for them. I like that.
Definitely.
Like that part of it. Yeah, that's nice to hear. But there's also the flip side of that, which is like, there could be somebody out there
Has
who,
an issue.
Yep.
One of the things I like, so we lived in California for almost 14 years. I love the fact that I'm not recognized. Aside the fact that I could
Right.
crawl out of bed and nobody's going, oh my gosh. But, where I was recognized all the time. And it worked in the favor in terms of I could knock on a door in toughest neighborhoods and people would invite me in because they watched you on television. So there are some pluses, but there's also a vulnerability. And that's why I said I'm so conscious with my kids and different things I do to grandkids now to try to be protected. Because there are also stories you do where people don't like you. They don't like
Yeah.
you. Jodi didn't do those kinds of stories. I think in Jodi's case, it would have been someone who had some thoughts of they just really were attracted to her, or thought they had a connection with her. And maybe
Right.
they'd met her occasionally. She was at so many events. It says, I'm talking to you now, flipping through a photo album for an event earlier in the month with her boss, golfing at a hospice charity. And all the time. She was at the Heart Association annual dinner. I think she never said no to almost any request to be out in the community.
One of the things that I think about a lot, you mentioned that idea of ambiguous grief. What I think one of the things that I've learned in the last year is that when someone goes missing, it's really hard. We all experience losses and they can be difficult, like the loss of a parent or the loss of the unimaginable amount of grief, but there's something about when someone is stolen from you that is very different. And there's something very different when someone is stolen from you, whether it's by accident or kidnapping or whatever, and you do not know what happened. And, it's also become clear to me that missing persons cases are they can be very hard to solve, and it takes certain kinds of skills to really focus on, it's a different kind of investigator that can really focus on a case once it goes cold. And I'm just curious, for those of you guys who started because it was originally started by journalists, the Find Jodi kind of effort, what was the impetus at that time? It was more than a decade after she had disappeared?
Yeah, well, it was 2003. So
almost
about 8 years. Yeah.
8 years. What drove that?
I think speaking for Josh and Gary, my sense is that they'd done something called the Huisentruit files, which is, I believe, 13 parts. And they got in depth and they wanted to continue. It's like, what do we do? And so it became this volunteer thing, and it's grown over the years, expanded. Some new people have joined our team. We've lost a couple people. Just in November, we lost a law enforcement member, a retired investigator from Minnesota who passed away. And but I just think it's a way to keep it going, that using our skills. And I feel like, how do we not use our skills? And how do we not keep it out there? And every time we do the event on June 27th, we always get a great coverage. I mean, even if it's not a milestone year or whatever, people connect and they come, and I think we know how it works. But it's unfinished business, I think, for all of us on the team. And we just hope that we can, as you said, someday, instead of being Find Jodi, we'd love it if it could be Found Jodi. And we're necessarily going to be a part of that. The main thing I think we're a part of is I do believe that you're trying to keep the most accurate archive of information, keep it out there to maybe help others as well who are digging and looking for answers.
Right. And I mean, there's something to be said for that. I've talked to more than one police official in my life who's bizarrely been appreciative of media and others keeping the pressure on. And one once summed it up to me as, well, you understand, like, we're law enforcement, and inevitably, there's going to be a hot case, and we know that in the early part of an investigation, that's when most of the clues are readily accessible, and we're most likely to solve it. And it becomes harder and harder over time. And that, the point he was making was then there'll become more pressing cases that we need to throw our resources at, because in that easy to solve window, and his point was we'll eventually lose track of them. But he reminded me of like one really important thing. He said, like, there's no police department that is immune to political pressure. And he said, if the political winds want us to focus on the hot thing in front of us, it's always going to take resources, and that media pressure on cold cases can be really beneficial. And one of the things I've noticed too in a lot of small towns that have struggled to solve cold cases, sometimes even, the political or even law enforcement infrastructure will, as bizarre as it seems, sort of like stop really looking into it, or stop talking about it, or it'll become almost a blemish for the community. And I think there's something positive that comes from keeping that attention on it. Yeah.
No question. And we've mixed things over the years. Some people have the attitude that this is law enforcement's job, it's not ours. And we never pretend that, we're not law enforcement. We don't have subpoena power, grand jury power, or anything. But
as a journalist, I so wish I did.
Oh, I do too. But on the other hand, if somebody says, I don't want to talk to you anymore, I want my lawyer, we can keep trying. There are things we can do where law enforcement can't. So I think, in my experience, aside from Jodi's case, working with agencies, some of the best investigators I know appreciate that. They know that we hear things. And I think in the end, if our goal is the same, is to get answers. If we get something, if it's fresh, I can see where they don't want us jumping in, because one of the things they like to talk about is the first bite of the apple. They don't want us contaminating an interview. But, we're talking in this case 30 years later or 10 years later in some cases. And there are things that we haven't put out there. There are things we've been made aware of. It's not much in this case, but I've been asked to not share because it's the old, as you've seen over the years, stuff that only maybe the killer knows. Or
right.
So you don't want to have someone confess to something and say something that's already been reported. So I do totally respect that. And I think all of us are seasoned enough in what we do that we're pretty careful about how we handle things.
I had this like very instructive moment for me early in my career as a police reporter. I was not the reporter on this case, and it was actually one of our researchers and another reporter. There had been, I think it was a body in a barrel. So hard to keep track of what it was, but I think somebody had found a body in a barrel in their house that had been there clearly since before they had lived there. And our researcher worked to find who the previous owners of the house were. Our reporter made a call before we had said anything to the cops. It was like a weekend. Had made a call to the guy who, one of the previous owners, and he was like, no idea, was barely in that crawl space. And then the guy committed suicide the next day.
Dear.
Yeah. And that moment was like really instructive to me, because it told me to like pause.
Take a deep breath.
Yeah, maybe there are moments to run it by law enforcement before I jump on it. And I think
that's the right thing to do, because, some law enforcement just soon you not say anything, but I would say, would this hurt the case, or what about this, or
simply because it's worth knowing. It doesn't mean that we're not necessarily going to publish it, but at least we know what the potential risks are, or have a better idea of what law enforcement thinks. But I like your point that like once someone lawyers up, the cops have to stop, but journalists don't. They can keep on going.
It's over, but so it's a mixed thing, and there are just different things we can do. And some cops can't work anymore if not for overtime. We don't have overtime. We're not pretty unstoppable.
Right.
And even if we're still full-time journalists, I know how, I'm sure same with you, we work way beyond the hours, way beyond anything officially on the clock, because it's part of who you are and what you do, and just keep going.
Have the folks in Mason City over the years been receptive to what you all are doing?
I'd say it's been mixed. There's certainly, it's visible, but as you said, it's tough because, there've now been 4 police chiefs, and the current investigator that's been on this case, I think 13, going on 14 years, if I remember correctly. And And they're frustrated. I know another investigator from another agency retired several years ago and just deeply frustrated that it wasn't solved. And um, different people have different takes on what we do.
Yeah. What would, in your mind, be an acceptable resolution of the case?
Well, I can't speak for the family, but I think
Right.
that to know, and I think the family, though, they would like to both. Most importantly, is to know they want to bring Jodi home to Long Prairie. They want to gather and say goodbye, and they want to know what happened. But I also think there's the twin part of it of justice. I mean, they want justice for Jodi as well, but the driving thing right now is to get answers.
And so for you, it sounds like it's probably very similar to what's driven you in journalism, which is getting to whatever, I hate to say getting to the truth, because, as journalists or law enforcement, prosecutors, anybody knows, even in the best case scenario, when it's on videotape, we're only getting a part of the truth, but getting something as close to as close to answers as possible is kind
Answers
of what's
and
driving it.
resolution. I mean, I don't like to use the word closure. Many of it, so that's not what you get, but some resolution. And I stare at pictures of Jodi sometimes. I go, Jodi, where are you? Where are you? Give me a hint and just something. And staring every time we go back to Mason City and looking back at the apartment complex, or as we're talking now, I'm looking at crime scene photos on a big blackboard I have here. It's like, is there something right in front of us that we're missing?
Yeah.
Jason, it's so humbling because you think, gosh, could have come up, and you wonder if in the end it's going to all be right there, or something we should have picked up on that we just missed.
Yeah, there's this great book, Restless Sleep, or it may be called The Restless Sleep, and it's about the NYPD cold case. One of the points it's a great book. One of the points that's made is like, on a lot of these cold cases, inevitably what solves them when they're solved you'll find in the first 2 weeks of the police file.
Yeah.
That you were staring at it all the way along.
A big thing that led to the break finally in Jacob Wetterling's case is Patty Wetterling met with the local authorities, and they brought in an FBI, exact wording, it's a response team that deals with children that are missing. And an investigator, if I recall correctly, was going through a file and noticed that another victim's mother, there'd been an incident 9 months earlier. Somebody was grabbed, Jared Shirel, who escaped. And I believe that Jared kept rubbing his sweatshirt, I believe, against his face. Anyway, that caught the attention of an investigator, and they took that shirt and they tested it. And it came back with Danny Heinrich's DNA. That was 25 years later. And
he was the man who was convicted.
Eventually.
Or not convicted, identified.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, what happened is that gave them enough to go get a search warrant on his house. When they were going in on the search warrant, they came across child pornography, and they ended up throwing the federal book at him. And he was looking at, I think, 18 years in prison. He was, I believe, in his mid-50s at the time. And, after all his court procedural pretrial things ran out, he supposedly reached out to his attorney and said he was willing to make a deal. And the deal in the end was he led them to Jacob in exchange for not being charged with Jacob's case and going away. And there's no doubt that he'll never ever be released. He was going to be in his 70s before he would be eligible in the federal level, and then likely to be committed to a state hospital, some kind of locked institution in Minnesota. But so was it justice? Not specifically for that crime. And Jared, because the statute of limitations expired, no justice for Jared, who'd been sexually assaulted. But it was that fresh eyes, that look, having a second victim. Again, things we don't. Maybe there's another one in Jodi's case, not one that we're aware of is similar, but those things were key to eventually getting an answer and bringing it.
And it's so interesting to me that what motivated him, and you never know what, when you're out there talking about something or you mention something, you never know what's going to motivate people. But it sounds like in that case, what motivated him to finally give the family answers was simply to not be officially charged with it. And it's kind of interesting to
Get a
me.
deal. Get a deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was in the courtroom sitting in the front row when the final court proceeding was held, and it was just so emotional. It was the
Mhm.
Wetterlings were sobbing the next row over, and just listening to him, describing what happened. It happened pretty quickly, and it was over. And I had driven by the site where they found it was in a sort of a pastoral setting in a farm. I'd driven by there so many times to think, who else? And one point I believe he had moved him because Jacob had surfaced after a year or so, but he'd been there. It wasn't all that far from home. And I interviewed his brother, who people thought, oh, he must have told somebody. But as time went on, it looks like Heinrich didn't tell anybody. He kept it to himself, but he didn't leave the area.
Mm. What
There were answers in the end. There was a service, and I think it gave the family some resolution, and they feel Jacob came home.
if all of a sudden, the person who's responsible for what happened to Jodi was listening, what message would you have for them?
If they're listening or out there,
Yeah.
I would ask that they find a place in their heart, in their anywhere, to have some compassion for her family. Even find a way to let somebody know where she is, even if they're not going to come forward themselves and put themselves legally in jeopardy. To find a way, just let the family have that. Let them gather in Long Prairie, Minnesota, share their Jodi stories, and not continue to wait for Jodi to find out what happened to Jodi. They may not get answers. They may not know who did it, but find a place. And it might be somebody. I interviewed a convicted killer years ago whose wife first told me that she was his alibi. And then after he went away to prison, she called me and said, I lied. And because I was afraid of him. But then she came forward and shared with police more information. You hope that there's someone like that out there, if it's not the person who did it. And we know, as I mentioned earlier, the anniversaries, milestones are very significant to the family, reminder of the loss. But they're also, from what we understand, significant to the perpetrators. And that's why we will keep doing these events, keep it out there. I think there's a reasonable chance that whoever took Jodi, if the person's still alive, is coming to our website, coming to our Facebook page, checking in. So we think of that as we move forward, that we could be getting a peek from that person. And I want them to know we're not going to give up. One of my grandkids asked me, how long are you going to do this? This is my grandson. And how long will you continue to do this, Grandma? And his younger sister said, forever. Well, I hope it's not forever. I hope I get answers, so I'm not, continuing. But we're committed one way or the other to continue to do what we can to use our experience to find Jodi.
I'm curious, what if you were just sort of stepping back and thinking, if you were to have sort of a message for people who are, let's say, in a similar situation to Jodi's family, or even for you guys who have, because I don't think what you're doing is all that different in the sense from an emotional place than what happens with a lot of the true crime sleuths who are out there who become attached to cases. For people who care about, for whatever reason, they care about these cases and they become attached to these people and their families, is there a message you have for them in terms of what they can do? Because, just in thinking about what you guys at Find Jodi have been doing, it is exhausting. It's tiring. It's an emotional roller coaster, but it does have, as you pointed out, like that blogger in Jacob Wetterling's case, it has the potential to have impact. Is there a message you'd have for them?
Yeah, well, in Christian Smart's case out here,
right. That's find your own backyard. Is that
Lambert, I believe it's
Chris Lambert. Yep.
What he did, and I believe there was somebody in Australia. I mean, look how huge the world is, how small the world is, and how big the internet is. And I think that I would keep doing it. Do it ethically. Do it. This is not entertainment. I went to CrimeCon one year, and it was interesting in some levels. But when I hear things like full body chills or these kind of statements, it's just, these are families. So never lose sense that these are real people like your family, and how would you want your family to be treated? So be respectful of that, and don't get beyond just the intrigue, or could it be this? Could it be that? Or, some kind of mystery crime club. To remember, these are real human beings. But if you care, you can keep it visible. You never know what a flyer on social media or something else might pop up. If you hashtag it with the victim's name, who knows who might be checking it out, and who knows who it might resonate with. So I would just encourage them to, in a respectful way, not treating it as entertainment, to do their part. To keep
it's funny. What I say is that true crime entertainment is the gateway drug to actually helping. So actually go ahead and take the drug and help. Right. And so, I think it's really interesting, and I know exactly what you mean, that, I think entertainment is not inherently a bad thing, but I think a lot of people gravitate to true crime as, let's quote unquote, entertainment, because there's something deeper going on for them.
There's some analytical stuff some of them want to get in there.
Yeah, puzzle solvers. Yeah. And I think for some of them, like, there's an emotional connection, or they could imagine themselves, or they have their own fears, or whatever that may be. But I always like to think of it as, like, it shouldn't stop at entertainment or whatever you're individually getting out of it. If there is an opportunity for you to use that puzzle solving or that empathy to either help with a case or advocate for something, to fight against domestic violence or whatever, take the opportunity to make good come out of this.
Sure. But be careful if you're in forums, so not put people's names out there. I mean, there's so many things you end up just
misinformation. Yeah.
We had I saw some of the comments people were putting in there, convicting people, and we just decided, as much as it's unfortunate, because who knows? We don't have ownership on smart ideas or anything, good ideas, but the risk of slamming people and putting them through it. And it just seems like it's gotten uglier in more recent years, some of the things that were said. And I mean, one of the ugliest things is the Amy Coons, the morning producer. She's been brutally attacked, and some of the things for not calling the police sooner, for having them call, but she really just thought Jodi went to sleep. And I totally get it. You're slamming, you're trying to get that show on. She's had to live like so many of the other people with the survivor's guilt, or living with it, and to go after people. And, as she pointed out once, I think her son said, if you Google her name, the first thing that pops up is Jodi Huisentruit. I mean, you're always associated with something. So have a little compassion for so many people are affected.
Yeah. And
the others.
Yeah. And I think you actually make a really good point, that I think, in that model of thinking of it as entertainment, it's really easy not to put yourself in the shoes of the other people. And you look at a situation like Amy's, and put yourself in her shoes, and chances are the vast majority of us would have done the exact same thing, because for most
given
of us,
the same circumstances.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Nowadays, you probably would call police, because post Jodi, you might call. But before Jodi, it was never even part of anybody's way of thinking.
But I also think, like, part of it is, like, we grow accustomed, the vast majority of us, that when we hear hoofbeats, we think horses, not zebras. Yeah. And we have and it's okay to have that horse reaction, and there's no way to really know whether it would have made any difference. That's
really a good point. The other thing that we find Jodi don't do, unlike, a lot of these forums, they like to speculate this or that, but we probably 90% of what we work on is not going to show up on our website unless it pans out. We are doing a lot of behind the scenes digging, checking this person out, that person, a lot of different things, but most of it we don't put out there. And, other forums do it, and that's how they do their thing. But
that's an interesting thing. Like, maybe there's a lesson for people who are true crime creators too, in bringing some of that, because what you're describing sounds a lot like a journalist's approach to things. I always tell people, like, whatever you see on paper, if it's a responsible journalist, probably somewhere between 50 and 90% of what they're probably sure about may have hit the cutting room floor. And what in your mind, like, is the logic behind that you don't want, that you don't want to share
We
him?
don't. If we haven't established things and we don't know how accurate things are, there's some of it we've occasionally touched on without naming names in a podcast, or we had an example, we try to be transparent when we do put something. For example, there were reports that we've never officially confirmed that Jodi's friend passed away, the one whose name has popped up the most over the years. And I basically walked people through the steps we took. Pretty good sources that indicate he has passed away, but they're in Arizona where the person was living. Death information, death records are not available to non-law enforcement, non-family members for 50 years. So you go for an obituary. I went through, right now we're also checking probate court, but I basically did a piece that said answers are elusive and be transparent. We can't say for sure. And we wouldn't even done that much if we didn't believe that it's pretty likely that it was accurate, but information had been put out by somebody connected with the family, but we couldn't verify it. So it's tough. So we put what we can verify. And then there's some things because of sensitivity we don't share. Or if the police have said, please don't be specific about this or that, because the last thing we want to do is just because we're doing a story, do you want to do something that's going to jeopardize finding Jodi or finding justice for Jodi? Absolutely not.
But I want to give you a chance. This has been a really interesting conversation, both from,
Appreciate
I
the
think,
opportunity to do it.
oh yeah, like I think there's something, last year, probably, I don't know, nearly maybe 10, 12 victims' family members I had conversations with. And there's something for kind of amazing to me about watching someone, and it really does remind me of my days in journalism, who, is not a relative of this person, is not an investigator, but somebody who seems to be pursuing answers with the level of, I don't even know how to describe it other than like the same level of love and caring as if it was one of your family members. And I want to give you a chance to just share any closing thoughts that you have, whether it's about Jodi's case or similar cases like this, or for other people like yourself who want to make a difference.
Well, as I'm talking to you, I'm looking at Jodi holding a camera, smiling. I think, if things have gone differently, Jodi and I might have worked together. She wanted to come up to the Twin Cities. I might have helped mentor her, one of the more senior reporters. So easily could have imagined that. And as I look at her, I think of my daughter at that age, working in a newsroom and doing what she was doing. And it's just so relatable. A bigger picture, I do consider her part of the family. I've never met her, but she's part of our news family. She was doing what we do when her life was, we believe, taken away. And, it may not turn out to be, her disappearance may not turn out to be connected to her job, but until we know otherwise, I believe that likely was. And she's part of our family. And for other families, one of the first cases I covered, I still have a picture of little Cassie Hansen, a little girl who was murdered in St. Paul. And first funeral I ever went to was Cassie's, this tiny white coffin. I'll never forget it. Watching that, you get connected. You get to know their moms and dads and their sisters and brothers. And some of them I've done stories with 20 years later, and you look at the loss, and it's, how do you not use the skills that you have, experience you have to try to help somebody else? It is so purposeful. It's frustrating. It's very sad, but it's also rewarding to feel like I'm doing something that's meaningful, and hoping that somehow all of this, what we're doing at Find Jodi, is going to help Jodi and maybe some other families. And so we often talk to other people in similar situations and try to give them suggestions on what they can do to get answers.
Could you imagine a day where after answers are found for Jodi, and like you said, Find Jodi becomes Found Jodi, that you guys would carry on and helping people through things like that article that you mentioned on what families and what the media can do, and other things to help try and bring attention and resolution to similar cases?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as you said, we do it now, and uh, I can't imagine. We've learned so much in our journeys, and all of us on our team have covered other cases as well, and we've gotten close. They may not be as high profile, but we've done it. And one of the things my husband's office said, "What's it going to be like when Joni's found?" Because I went through that with Jacob. I'll never forget getting I never thought Jacob would be found, and I remember getting a phone call from the news director at the station in Minneapolis saying they were hearing reports on another station that Jacob and Val, could I check it out? Could I call the family? Well, that was the hardest call I've had to make. And I ended up texting Patty, and she wrote back and she confirmed it. And I just sat there. I'm going to start crying now. I mean, she said, yeah, she confirmed it. And I just sat there and sobbed. I was in my pajamas. It was California time. And it took me about 10 minutes to get it together. Then I called the newsroom and we reported it, but it was, and then there was, my husband said, where do we go now? It's always been, where's Jacob? Now we know. I said, well, I hope this also gives me hope that maybe we'll have an answer for Jodi, because I never thought I'd have an answer for Jacob after all those years. And we did. And it took 27 years. Now we're going on 30 for Jodi, but it was tough. I mean, it's going to be an awfully tough phone call to make someday if somehow I have to follow up with the family or other of her friends, because her friends are very tight. We keep up. We're very close to a lot of them. And I just can't imagine that day.
Yeah.
But I hope for it. I really hope for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't even imagine, like, it's got to be so bittersweet for people to have
not much sweet, but it's better. It's the alternative.
It's better.
Worse. It's better. Yeah. And I remember I went to Jacob's memorial service, and it was a beautiful service, and it's just very, very powerful. And I hope to someday to live long enough to go to Jodi's service in some sort.
Kind of
their loved ones.
It's kind of longing for something that you also hope never happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, thank you. I really am so grateful for the amount of time, the sensitivity that you bring to these cases. And you never know who might be out there halfway around the world that might be listening somewhere. That just hope if someone is listening, to find a place in your heart to make that call, get the information one way or the other to the Mason City Police or to the DCI. Agent Ryan Herman, I can give you the contact stuff, or if you won't go to law enforcement or FBI, to reach out to us anonymously. Just don't make her family go through another year, another Christmas, another Thanksgiving with that empty seat without knowing.
Yeah. Thank you, Carolyn. I really appreciate it. And
Thank you,
I hope you find answers, and I hope so many families going through similar things who are searching for answers can learn from this experience. I think sometimes we look at things and we think we can only learn from the situations where there's resolution, but I think we can all learn and build upon the good things are done. So I'm very appreciative that you all are out there. And actually, frankly, for me, I'm about to get emotional now. I think just listening to the work that you're doing gives me hope for so many other
thank you.
Cases. So yeah, it was very cool.
I hope other organizations, and I know a number of families have done that's, gathered, because it takes, we have a whole variety of people in our group, from most of us from a TV background, but how do you not do it?
Takes a village, right?
How do you not do it? Yeah.
If you'd like to join us for more discussions with me and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, and to support the podcast, you can also join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast, We'll see you all again in a few days.